So let's talk about some of the long-term effects of the Industrial Revolution. Some of the long-term effects on agriculture were, one, there was a tremendous increase in agricultural production. The production of crops became more quick, more efficient. We were able to produce more food with less people working the land, which decreases the labor force involved in agriculture. There are a couple of examples. Animals began to pull machines, which eventually led to combines, which eventually led to tractors, which all sped up agricultural production. Okay? On population, because less people were working in agriculture, there was an excess people to work. Well, not only were less people working in agriculture, but also the population exploded as a result of the Industrial Revolution. People are moving into cities at a rapid rate. The population increased because there was more food being produced more efficiently, and even, one would argue, more healthy food was increased. People had more money to spend to buy food, and so, again, population increased. Also, there were tremendous sanitation benefits, which, again, we'll talk about here in a few minutes when you guys play the urban game. Towns, cities began to grow. This is the massive move or shift of the world to urban centers. The developed world today would not be considered developed if it were not for the Industrial Revolution. In fact, you could argue that countries that are developing simply just have not hit the Industrial Revolution. I would always argue that the Industrial Revolution itself lasted from about 1650 or 1700 and is still going on today, depending on where you are in the world. So in a developed country like the United States, Britain, or most of Western Europe, today, you're clearly developed. In sub-Saharan Africa, depending on where you are, the levels of development could greatly vary. Environment. There were tremendous negative impacts on the environment. There were no regulations to how much pollution these plants could put out, these factories could put out. There were no regulations on where they could dump their waste. There were no regulations at all. And so basically the environment was pretty devastatingly harmed. However, without the damage to the environment, we wouldn't have also had the other positive effects that we do see. Education began to increase. Because there were a group of people who are now more wealthy, and we'll talk about the middle class in a second, education began to spread. It began to be common knowledge that every person, the entire public should be educated with at least some modicum or a little bit of forced schooling. Society, there were major societal shifts. The urban game really highly illustrates that, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it right now, but societal shifts. The family unit began to change fundamentally and forever as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Families were no longer these massive extended families, but now what we're going to call the nuclear family, where it's really just mom, dad, and their kids. Occasionally you get parents living with their children, but it's not a terribly common concept, whereas prior to the Industrial Revolution, it was. The working class lives, you could argue, suffered greatly because of this. Working class lives, their income went down, the supply of food for them went down, and so their lives really radically changed during the Industrial Revolution. Although I would also argue that today, as we're coming out of the Industrial Revolution, that their lives are much better off than they were before the Industrial Revolution. Men, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, often saw their livelihoods taken away from them. Capitalists quickly figured out that women were cheaper to employ. They could pay them less, and they got the same work done. So women and children began employed in factories, and so the role of men really it emasculated or feminized them and took away their role as a primary breadwinner. Now, again, men, you could argue, had those traditional dominant roles of middle management or management, etc., and so many might have still done that. But the working class men definitely suffered as a result of the revolution. Women, whose place in the home had always been seen to be in the house, whose role in the world had been secondary to men, now begin to see that they are breadwinners, begin to see that they are earning money to help support their family, which they had always done, but now they're doing it outside of the home, which is a dramatic shift. Traditionally, women made money, but it was inside the home. Now they are moving that shift outside the home. The working class children really heavily suffered because of this as well. Working class children were put to work just as they always had been in farms and factories, or not factories, but on farms and homes. But now the working class children are having to work in factories where the conditions are much more dangerous and it's much more difficult to survive. if you fall and you have an accident in there. The middle class began to grow also as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Middle class would be managers. Teachers arguably became part of what was a growing middle class. And this group that are not the working class, the very bottom of society, poorest in society, or the upper class, but this group somewhere in the middle who help manage the day-to-day operations of factories and plants. They were their standing in society grew and their place grew, as well as their money, and they were able to buy and afford new things as the Industrial Revolution ended and continues today. All right, those are some of the quick causes, effects, and kind of in the middle of what happened during the Industrial Revolution. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Sorry it was so long.